So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maurya Hanspal, and we're back again on one more interesting session on financial management. So here in the previous session, we talked about the most important model to calculate the cost of equity, and we talked about our CAPM model, the capital asset pricing model, and we talked about that. What does the CAPM model exactly tell us? The capital asset pricing model. So through the equation of the capital asset pricing model, we can calculate our cost to equity, like which was nothing but your risk-free rate plus your beta into your RM minus RF, right? And what does the CAPM model tells us? The CAPM model tells us the equilibrium relationship between the cost of equity and the systematic risk, which is like represented or shown by beta. Then we tried to talk about the small minus a large business ka premium and also talked about the unsystematic risk within the same equation. Then we also talked about the security market line, which shows you a graphical representation of the CAPM model. Then we talked about the capital market line, which is nothing but takes into consideration the total risk, that is both the systematic risk and the unsystematic risk. Whereas on the other hand, your security market line, it took into consideration just a systematic risk or beta, right? Then we talked about the Sharpe ratio, the slope of the CML, like which was nothing but your RM minus RF by the standard deviation. Then we talked about the most important theory of the efficient frontier, that what exactly is the efficient frontier, which gives you the ideal combination of the portfolios having higher return for the same level of risk or same return for a lower level of risk. Then we got to know that what do we mean by the market portfolio or the tangency portfolio. We talked about the capital allocation line or the CA line, which is almost the same as the CML line, because at the tangential point, even your CL becomes your CML. Okay, then we also talked about what? We also talked about your CML ko, like we can call CML as a combination of the market portfolio and the risk-free assets, because ultimately when we talk about the market portfolio, those are a combination of risky assets as the proportion in the index. तो जितना proportion risky assets का market index में है, उतना ही proportion आपके market portfolio में भी होगा. Okay, then we talked about the lending portfolio and the borrowing portfolio. Okay, though there are more concepts of like about lending and borrowing portfolio, but like that we'll talk in some like subsequent sessions. ठीक है, because वहाँ पे फिर concepts आ जाते हैं बहुत सारे. ठीक है. So this is something about the CAPA model, the most widely used model for calculating the cost of equity. Then we also try to understand the most important difference like between the cost of equity and return on equity. Now, if we talk about the assumptions of the CAPA model, okay, the first assumption it said that all the investors are considered to be efficient investors. And now what do we mean by the efficient investors? Investors who like to position themselves on the efficient frontier. मतलब ये वो investors हैं who want a higher return for the same level of risk or the same return for a lower level of risk, which is represented by your efficient frontier. And that is why we call them as the efficient frontier. People ask in the top interviews as well that what do you mean by an efficient investors? People say an efficient investor is a one who takes higher risk for higher return. No, they will say you no, you are wrong. He is a person who wants to have higher return for the same level of risk or same return for a lower level of risk. These two scenarios you need to know. Okay. Their exact location on the efficient frontier, however, depends upon the risk return utility function. इसने बोला their exact location on the efficient frontier depends upon the risk return utility function. Now, what exactly is the utility function? What exactly is a utility function? So that is something you also need to know about. ठीक है, मतलब कि हमारा मतलब कि यूटिलिटी फंक्शन क्या होता है. Just hung यार, give me a second. That is something also that you need to know in a very good manner, like about the risk return utility function. So it is nothing but ज़्यादा कुछ complex की होने वाली बात नहीं है. So basically what the risk return like utility function is basically telling you how much risk can a person take basically. ठीक है, अगेन ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ द मतलब कि लाइक ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ द रिस्क एंड रिटर्न, लाइक दिस काइंड ऑफ एनालिसिस इज डन। ठीक है, तो उसमें टेंशन लेने की नीड नहीं है। उसमें लाइक यू टेंड टू प्लॉट सम ग्राफ्स। Okay, like now here you can have the three kinds of people which I have discussed in my previous sessions also. You can have a risk averse investor, you can have a risk taking investor, and then you can have as a risk neutral investor. So three kind of investors are there in the market: risk averse investor, risk taking investor, and a risk neutral investor. A risk averse investor is a person who does not want to take risk in the market. Okay, like he would be maintaining around 75 to 80 to 85% of the portfolio in fixed income instruments. And by fixed income instruments, I mean your bonds, debentures, your fixed deposits, certificate of deposits, commercial papers, treasury bills, notes, bonds. A risk-taking investor is an investor who loves to take the maximum risk. He's a risk-loving investor. So since he's a risk-loving investor, so that person would be investing max to max into equity. And then you have a risk neutral investor who combines the strategies of both the risk taking and the risk lover. And he's a person who combines both the equity and the bond in his portfolio. So a risk averse investor, his main aim is to get fixed income or the capital preservation. Fixed income उसको आती रहे and जितनी उसने अपनी कैपिटल लगाई है उसको अपनी वो कैपिटल वापस मिलती जाए. Okay, so that is the major concern of a risk averse person. Okay, a risk taking person, he wants capital appreciation and growth. उसका पैसा बढ़े, उसका growth से पैसा बढ़े. And a risk neutral person, he wants both the capital appreciation and capital preservation. He also wants fixed income and growth. Like he combined the strategy of both of them. तो एक यूटिलिटी कर्व हम बनाते हैं. So when we talk about the risk averse का यूटिलिटी कर्व, it's concave in nature. It's concave in nature. मतलब and a risk taking one, it tends to be convex at a certain point. याद रखना, रिस्क एवर्स का जो यूटिलिटी कर्व है, इट इज ऑलवेज कॉन्वेक्स. ओके, so let's try to draw about a risk averse investor. Right. So जब हम रिस्क एवर्स इन्वेस्टर की बात कर रहे हैं ना, उसका कर्व कुछ ऐसा सा होगा. Like it will be concave from below. Like if we call it ना, something called concave from below बोलते हैं इसको. अगर हम exact terminology में use करूं, it can be called as concave from below. This is a risk averse investor. A risk taking investor और a very low risk averse investor, उसका थोड़ा सा मतलब कि नीचे से ना कॉन्वेक्स हो जाएगा, फ्लैट लगेगा थोड़ा सा उसका. और a risk neutral one will be like somewhere in between. दो इनमें ज्यादा डिफरेंस पता नहीं चल रहा होगा, बट द थिंग इज ये थोड़ा कॉनकेव होता है नीचे से ज्यादा. रिस्क एवर्स वन, रिस्क लविंग वन इज कॉन्वेक्स फ्रॉम बिलो एंड इट इज समवेयर इन बिटवीन. इस चीज को तुम याद रखना, कॉनकेव कॉन्वेक्स को. ये रिस्क टेकिंग था, ये कॉन्वेक्स है. राइट, सो दीज थिंग मस्ट बी अंडरस्टूड टू यू. ठीक है, this is nothing but a risk return utility function. So coming back to the assumption, so all the investors are considered to be efficient investors who like to position themselves on the efficient frontier. ये हमें आ गया था समझ. The exact location on the efficient frontier, however, depends upon the risk return utility function. Now their position on the efficient frontier, it will ultimately depend that are the risk averse having a concave, risk taking having a convex from below, or risk neutral. Okay. Now the B part says investors are free to borrow or lend any amount of money at the risk-free rate of return. It means they can borrow and lend anything at the RF rate of return. Your RF is nothing but your government securities का वो. मतलब आपको जो return मिलता है, the risk-free rate of return. So investors are free to borrow or lend any amount of money at the risk-free rate of return. Okay. So it might be possible to borrow at the risk-free rate of return. हो सकता है borrow हमेशा कर लो, but lend करने में it can be a problem because not everyone has a chance to borrow or lend at the risk-free rate, right? There can be a person who has matlab, like for example, if I go to take a loan, okay, now the bank will see that whether what kind of person I am, how is my CIBIL. If he thinks my CIBIL has been going good, like above 750 and all, and I've been like paying off my loans and I have a lesser amount of loans in my custody, he'll be charging me a lower rate of interest, maybe 6%, 7%, equivalent to a risk-free rate. Whereas if my CIBIL is not too good and I have taken a large amount of loans, बहुत सारे loan ले लिए, in that case, I tend to be a risky borrower. In that case, like he'll be giving me loan at a higher rate of interest because the risk has increased. Okay, so certainly in the real world scenario, it might not be possible to borrow and lend at the risk-free rate. So that is something which people also talk about, and they call it as like one of the biggest drawbacks of the CAPA model as well. How can every person, like for example, if there are 100% in India, if India has a population of 100, how can those 100 people get a loan at the same rate of interest? They will get loan on the basis of their risk, कौन कितना risky है, right? Similarly, जो point A था उसमें लिखा था कि all the investors are considered to be efficient investors who like to position themselves on the efficient frontier. Okay, now they are the efficient investors. So not everyone will be the efficient investor also. There might be some investor, देखो एफिशिएंट इन्वेस्टर क्या जाता है कि उसको हायर रिटर्न मिले सेम रिस्क लेके, या सेम रिटर्न मिले लोअर, क्या मतलब कि सेम रिटर्न मिले लोअर रिस्क लेके. वो ये नहीं चाह रहा कि हायर रिटर्न मिले हायर रिस्क लेके. So there are a large number of investors also tend to take higher risk for higher return. So then they won't be the efficient investor. So how can everyone be an efficient investor? And how can everyone lie on the efficient frontier also? Right? Now your categorization of risk averse, your risk loving, risk taking, and risk neutral and whatsoever can be the scenario in like real life also. In the C point it says A and B point we have discussed in quite intensive manner. C point it says all investors are expected to have homogeneous expectations. That is, their future rates of return have identical probability distribution. All investors are expected to have homogeneous expectations. That is, their future rates of return have identical probability distributions. So what do we mean by homogeneous expectations? By homogeneous expectations, we mean everyone is having the same expectation of return. Like for example, if I think that from the market, I can get a return of 15%. My friend should also think the same, that he will also get a return of 15%. His friend must also think the same, that he will also get 15%. My dad, my mom, my brother, sister, family members must also think that they will get a return of 15% only. In the real life, it is not possible. Everyone has different expectations. Expectations in reality are not homogeneous, they're heterogeneous in fact. Because if I am expecting that from the market, I would be getting a 15% rate of return. It is not a compulsion or mandatory that my friend, my family members will also be expecting the same thing, but they would be getting 15% return only. Okay, so this thing is a clear demarcation in the real life situation. Okay, and that is why this is having identical probability distribution, because expectation is nothing but the probability. Because we are just expecting our returns ना कि मुझे 15% मिलेगा तो उसको भी 15% मिलेगा. That is nothing but your identical probability distribution. And by homogeneous expectation we mean same expectation है कि मुझे 15 मिलना है और मेरे दोस्त को भी 15 मिलना है. मतलब दोस्त की expectation, मैं उसकी मतलब एक्सपेक्टेशन नहीं बता रहा, उसकी खुद की एक्सपेक्टेशन है कि 15% उसको मिलेगा. मेरे फैमिली मेंबर्स की अपनी खुद की एक्सपेक्टेशन है उनको भी 15% मिलेगा. But that is not possible in the real life scenario, because there might be a risk taking person who has invested 80-25% of his amount into equity, right? And that person might be having higher growth चाहिए होगी. That person might be expecting a 20%, 30% return. Whereas a person who might have invested into the fixed income instruments, he might be a risk averse investor. He might just be expecting 8% to 9%. That's it. Whereas a person who is a risk neutral person, that person might be like investing like 10 to 11%. So I personally think that this line, like where it says, their exact location on the efficient frontier, however, depends upon the risk, return, utility function. And वही वो सी पॉइंट में बोल देता है कि all the investors are expected to have homogeneous expectations. That is, their future rates of return have identical probability distribution. They tend to be contrary. ठीक है, मतलब कि कॉन्ट्राडिक्शन प्लेस करते हैं, बिकॉज अगर आपका रिस्क यूटिलिटी डिफरेंट है तो हाउ कैन यू हैव सेम एक्सपेक्टेशन ऑफ रिटर्न? इफ आई एम इन्वेस्टिंग ऑल इनटू फिक्स्ड इनकम इंस्ट्रूमेंट लाइक विच आर सेफ, जो मुझे 6 से 7% देंगे, तो मैं क्यों करूंगा एक्सपेक्ट कि मुझे 15% का रिटर्न मिलेगा? दैट्स कॉमन सेंस, बेसिक सेंस, अनलेस एंड अनटिल यू आर फुलिश. Okay, so that is something that you need to take into consideration as well. Then it says D point that all investors have same investment time horizons. By same investment time horizons mean if my time horizon is to stay in the equity market for 10 years, my friend will also have his own fixed time horizon of 10 years. His friends, his family members, my friends, my family members all over the world. If India is having 100 people, 100 people will invest only for 10 years. That's it. But in the real life, everyone has different time horizons. Someone invests like into the market for 10 years. Like some invest for 5 years, some for 15 years. Like everyone has different expectations. Like some invest money for the purpose of their retirement. Like some invest money for the purpose of their buying a home. Like some invest money for the purpose of buying some car or any other luxury items. Some invest for the purpose of their children's education. Like some invest for their own marriage or children's marriage. Or there can be some different kinds of needs as well. Okay, so all needs are different, your time horizons are different, the return expectations are also different, which cannot be homogeneous, neither nor can have a identical probability distribution. Okay, then it says all investments are assumed to be infinitely divisible, making it possible to even buy or sell fractional shares of any portfolio. वो बोल रहा है all investments are assumed to be infinitely divisible, मतलब इन्वेस्टमेंट्स को आप डिवाइड करके खरीद सकते हो, making it possible to even buy or sell fractional shares of any portfolio. Tell me one thing, if you are doing direct stock picking, individual stocks खरीद रहे हो, TCS का शेयर अगर 3,500 रुपीज का है, can you buy half of TCS? 1,700 कुछ का तुम TCS खरीद सकते हो. Can you buy 1/4 of TCS? For all of those who trade and do long-term investing in shares, do you buy 1/4 of the share ever? Is that option ever available on any of the apps like that you trade with? Your Zerodha, Upstocks, Grow, Angel Broking, 5paisa, those are your discount brokers. अगर तुम traditional brokers banks के पास भी जाते हो, HDFC Securities, ICICI Securities, Kotak Securities, do they allow you to buy half shares, 1/4 of the share? No, it is not possible. In mutual funds you buy units, obviously. अगर तुमने 500 रुपए करे इन्वेस्ट एंड म्यूचुअल फंड में 100 शेयर्स हैं, तो दैट 500 रुपीज विल बी लाइक डिवाइडेड अमंग 100 शेयर्स ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ देयर, मतलब कि देयर state in the mutual fund. Like for example, if A share has like 20%, then 20% of 500 will go to A. If B share has 0.03%, then 0.03% of 500 will go in B. In mutual fund, you people can get units, but shares को you cannot buy in half, 1/4 of fractional. This thing is only possible in US markets. In United States of American markets, it is possible to buy even fractional shares. Maybe these people, Markowitz and all the people who have created these models, like they belong to US based countries or like foreign countries. Maybe in that sense, he formulated this line that you can even buy fractional of shares. But in the Indian context, it's not possible until and unless you invest into mutual funds. People like you, people get units. Okay. Then it says, E point हो गया. ठीक है. The process of buying or selling of assets does not involve any transaction costs. The process of buying or selling of assets does not involve any transaction cost. How can transaction cost not be involved? Like whenever you buy something, there is some transaction cost involved in it. There are some delivery charges, there are some brokerage charges, there's security transaction tax, commodities transaction tax. अगर तुम commodities में trade कर रहे हो, all these things are applicable. तुम्हारे 0.025% charge on equity like delivery and sales like is there. अगर if I show you, if I like even show you, I'll just show you even. If we go here, we go to like Zerodha charges. List of all the charges and taxes because I personally use Zerodha. यहाँ पे लिखा हुआ सी जीरो ब्रोकेज इक्विटी इंट्राडे में यू हैव टू पे 0.03% और ₹20 ऑन द एग्जीक्यूटेड ऑर्डर विच एवर इज लो, और इक्विटी इंट्राडे, इक्विटी फ्यूचर्स, इक्विटी ऑप्शन में फ्लैट ₹20 लग रहा है. Then your security transaction tax is STT. Your CTT is commodity transaction tax. अगर तुम शेयर्स में नहीं करे ट्रेड, तुम कमोडिटीज में करे, और मेटल्स, वीट, बार्ले, ये सब में. 0.1% ऑन बाय एंड सेल है, 0.025% ऑन द सेल साइड. ऑन द सेल साइड में लग रहा है. ये चार्जेस दिख रहे हो, ये ट्रांजैक्शन चार्जेस. तो बोल रहा है कि ट्रांजैक्शन चार्ज लगते ही नहीं है. एनएससी बीएससी पे लग रहे हैं, तो बहुत ही कम है बट लग रहे हैं. जीएसटी 18% ऑन ब्रोकरेज एंड ट्रांजेक्शन चार्जेस. इसको तुम ऐड करोगे, इस अमाउंट को, ब्रोकरेज को एंड ट्रांजैक्शन को, उसके टोटल पे यू हैव टू पे लाइक 18%. सम सेबी चार्जेस आर देयर. अगर तुम करोड़ों में ट्रेड करो तो 10 पर करोड़. स्टैम्प चार्जेस आर देयर. अगर तुम करोड़ों में बाय साइड में ट्रेड कर रहे हो तो 0.015% और 1500 ऑन दी बाय साइड. दीज थिंग्स आर देयर. मतलब ट्रांजैक्शन चार्जेस हैं इन द रियल लाइफ. ठीक है, सो दैट इज द थिंग दैट यू शुड नो. ठीक है, अब वो बोल रहा है फॉर एग्जाम्पल, holders of pension funds and even religious groups do not have to pay taxes. And further, it has been found out that transaction costs on many financial instruments that are traded by most of the financial institutions are less than 1%. अब यहाँ पे वो बोल रहा है कि नो ट्रांजैक्शन कॉस्ट है, फिर नीचे पे बोल रहा है ट्रांजैक्शन कॉस्ट आर लेस देन 1% है. इजंट इट कॉन्ट्राडिक्टरी? अगेन इट इज कॉन्ट्राडिक्टरी, राइट? अब जो तुम्हारे पेंशन होती हैं, पेंशन में ऑब्वियसली तुम टैक्स पे कहाँ कर रहे हो, बिकॉज मैं मतलब कि 1,50,000 तक यू गेट अ लिमिट अंडर सेक्शन 80cc. ऑल्सो अंडर सेक्शन 80cc सबसेक्शन 1b में एडिशनल 50,000 का टैक्स डिडक्शन यू गेट, राइट? Even for the religious group, so your like religious group comes in the context of donations and all, सेक्शन 80G में आ जाता है, बट टैक्स नहीं लगता. इन दो सिनारियोज को तुम लेकर चलोगे तो टैक्स नहीं लग रहा, बट बाकी एसेट्स पे तो लग रहा है, बाकी फाइनेंशियल इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स पे तो लग रहा है. And also you have the long-term capital gains tax also. If you are selling your shares of equity mutual funds after 1 year, then if your gain amount is more than 1 lakh, so on that extra amount of more than 1 lakh, 10% capital gains would be taxed. But if you are selling it before before 1 year, then 15% short-term capital gains tax would be charged. अगर तुम डेट फंड में हो, डेट फंड का मेच्योरिटी इज 3 years एंड इक्विटी फंड का इज 1 year. अगर तुम डेट फंड को, इफ यू आर सेलिंग योर डेट फंड आफ्टर 3 years, then 20% with indexation is charged. Indexation is nothing but it includes the impact of inflation ताकि टैक्स कम देना पड़े. और 10% without indexation is charged. और अगर तुम 3 साल से पहले कर रहे हो तो इफ सिक्योरिटी ट्रांजैक्शन टैक्स इज एप्लीकेबल, देन तुम 15% पे करोगे. अगर सिक्योरिटी ट्रांजैक्शन टैक्स इज नॉट एप्लीकेबल, देन तुम अपने इनकम टैक्स स्लैब के हिसाब से पे करोगे. These things are there, taxations are there. Okay. So again, your LTGS and these things are charged. Then G point says it is assumed that the inflation rate is fully anticipated, or in the other situations it may be totally be absent, thus resulting in no change in the tax rate. Can you anticipate inflation? You can anticipate inflation. You can kind of like project inflation. Even the Monetary Policy Committee, RBI, people project inflation, but you cannot fully anticipate it. एग्जैक्ट नहीं, एग्जैक्ट होगा बहुत अच्छी बात है, बट हमेशा एग्जैक्ट नहीं होगा. And in situation totally be absent, how can you assume inflation to be absent? इन्फ्लेशन हर साल बढ़ी है, 6 to 7% के रेट से बढ़ती है. एवरेज में साल बाय साल 10-12% लाइक इन्फ्लेशन बढ़ती है. हाउ कैन यू एज्यूम नो इन्फ्लेशन इन द इकोनॉमी? इन द रियल लाइफ इन्फ्लेशन होगा, टैक्स भी होगा. जितनी महंगाई बढ़ेगी उतना टैक्स भी लगेगा, बिकॉज वी इन इंडिया फॉलो अ प्रोग्रेसिव टैक्सेशन सिस्टम. व्हाट डू वी मीन बाय अ प्रोग्रेसिव टैक्सेशन सिस्टम? इनकम ज्यादा होगी तो टैक्स ज्यादा लगेगा. The other system you have as a regressive tax system. In the case of regressive tax system, जितनी इनकम कम है उतना टैक्स कम होगा. In the case of a progressive tax system, जितनी इनकम ज्यादा है तो उतना टैक्स बढ़ता जाएगा. ठीक है. The other assumption it says of the theory is the equilibrium in the capital markets. That is, all investments are correctly priced on par with the risk levels. It says the market is at equilibrium. It means everything is known to everyone. If I am investing in the stock market, ठीक है, मुझे शेयर्स का प्राइस पता है कि शेयर का प्राइस क्या होगा क्या नहीं होगा. I have access to all the public information as well as the private information. So public information चलो मान लिया कि मतलब that is available on public domain. Anyone can have access to that. But private information, the public investors do not have it. It says even the private information is available with us. That is not possible. It says market is at equilibrium. It means market is perfect. मतलब अगर if your Sensex is giving you a return of 15%, your portfolio will also give you a return of 15%. It will not outperform the market. It will not underperform the market also. 15% है तो 15% का return मिलेगा ही मिलेगा. But we create a portfolio in order to outperform the market also, ताकि हमको 15% से return ज़्यादा मिल सके. And in case of index fund which copy your Sensex, वो तक 15% का return नहीं दे पाते. They also give you 14.90 or 14.85 because again transaction costs होते हैं and redemption costs होते हैं. So this is again contradictory. And all investments are correctly priced on par with their risk levels. Let's say that the market is not overvalued or undervalued, but we know that the market gets overvalued at times. People are talking about the overvaluation of the market. People are selling securities, and these things that happen in the market when people buy the stocks with irrational exuberance. अब टर्म यूज कर दी है तो मतलब भी समझाई देता हूँ. irrational exuberance. So what is happening in your irrational exuberance में स्टॉक के जिनके फंडामेंटल्स भी नहीं है तुम उनको भी मतलब तुम लाइक मतलब कि तुम खरीदे जा रहे हो. दैट इज ड्राइविंग द मार्केट वेरी हाई. Additional assumptions leaving CAPM like borrowing and lending at the risk-free rate are unrestricted. अगर तुम borrowing and lending you people can do at the risk-free rate with no restriction, and that I told you in the above points also. The rate can be changed. Also the thing is that अगर मैं अपनी if I'm coming to take the loan in my individual capacity, then I might be charged the higher rate of interest because I might have a lesser amount of assets. Whereas like when we talk about the corporate leverage, a company is coming up to take loan. In that case, the company might be charged at a lower rate because the company has assets. All investments are perfectly divisible, we talked about. All investors have uniform, single period investment horizon, and expectation regarding means, variances, and covariance of the securities are same. मतलब मीन मतलब कि कितना रिटर्न मिलेगा, वेरियंस कितना रिस्क होगा. अब ये एक एडिशनल पॉइंट भी आ गया. अगर मुझको लग रहा है कि मार्केट में 12% का रिस्क है तो मेरे साथ वाले को भी लगेगा 12% का रिस्क है, उसकी ओपिनियन में चेंज नहीं होगा. मेरा दोस्त, मेरी फैमिली मेंबर्स. But in real life, this opinion can be changed. No one can have same expectations of return. A risk-taking investor will assume higher risk, right? जो रिस्क एवर्स इन्वेस्टर है जिसको मार्केट में रिस्क लेना नहीं है वो 15% 20% का रिस्क क्यों लेगा, राइट? एंड कोवेरियंस इज नथिंग बट योर डिग्री ऑफ एसोसिएशन बिटवीन सिक्योरिटीज. अगर मुझको लगता है कि सिक्योरिटी ए एंड बी साथ चलेंगी इतने परसेंटेज से, so it is not mandatory that a person who's sitting next to me will also think that these securities will move together like by the same rate, right? There are no imperfections in the market. In real life, there are imperfections in the market, and that is where people do arbitrage opportunities करते हैं वो market में. मतलब BSC में if you're getting the stock at a cheap rate, they buy at BSC and sell it at NSC where the price is being traded high. But these situations are really because there is point का differences होता है and वहाँ पे like you can't earn in like point का differences. Then it says the capital markets are at equilibrium, and this we also talked about. These are like some of your assumptions of the CAPM